Thank you very much, Jeff, for the very nice, kind introduction. So I'm Dr. Aaron Liu, Research Fellow at QUT. As Jeff mentioned, that I'm part of our QUT Australian Renewable Energy Agency Affordable Heating and Cooling Innovation Hub project, and I'm responsible for Queensland Children's Hospital Living Lab, and that's on the healthcare side. And here today, I'm to discuss with you the aged care energy security and impact of lockdown and some investment or energy planning findings so far. We highly appreciate support from ARENA and Australian Institute of Refrigeration, Air Conditioning and Heating, Bolton Clark and other SMEs. So a bit of vision or why or how we are motivated to do the work we are doing now is economical and sustainable energy for the healthcare sector. That includes hospitals and aged care facilities. Here's some global initiatives to promote that. So here, today I'm going to first discuss our healthcare energy and emission overview for a couple of minutes, then talk about aged care needs and forecast for the coming 30 years for Australia. And then we talk about energy performance at aged care facilities, communities globally and in Australia. After that, we're going to see some nice charts on what factors are associated with energy use at aged care communities. And then later is, has lockdown changed energy use and demand profiles at aged care facilities? Let's start. So globally, healthcare emission is about 4.4% of global net emission. 29% of these emissions are directly related to care facilities and vehicles, and energy use accounts for more than half of the sector's emissions. And if we talk about top 10 healthcare emitters in the world, that Australia, in terms of healthcare emission, we're about number 10 in the world. If we talk about the country's emission in total, Australia is about number 17 in the world. And if we plot that the healthcare emission footprint into the chart on the right, we can see that United States, China, European Union are kind of top 3. And Australia, we have 25 million people, and we account for about 2% of global healthcare emission in the world. If we talk about healthcare emission per capita base, that we are also in the top range. So that's over 1 ton per capita. Australia, Canada, Switzerland, United States are the top 4 in this regard. Before I talk more specifically about aged care facilities, that I would like to maybe make a little bit short clarification or introduction. Residential aged care communities are different, are not the same to retirement villages. So on the left, it's more like an aged care setting, and on the right, it's more like a retirement village setting or independent living unit setting. At a retirement village, normally we don't need that higher nursing staff to residents ratio, and residents have their own units or even garden or things to do to look after themselves, mostly as well. But on the aged care facility side or community side, that we tend to have 24/7 nursing staff on site, a slightly higher ratio, much higher ratio for caring our residents on site, and also helping people, for example, getting off the bed or move from private rooms into a more public space or to enjoy meals, for example. So it's different. Here's an overview of our Australian aged care industry or the whole sector. We have about 2,700 sites. So more precisely is 2,695 sites across Australia. And by the end of last financial year, we have about 183,989 residents living. 70% of them are in major cities, 29% are in regional areas, and 1% in the remote area. And the Commonwealth spent about 13.4 billion in the sector for residential aged care, and the whole sector employs about 235,000 people. That was years ago statistics, and I believe that now must be increased a bit. If we talk about energy, so for our residential aged care facilities residents, this is 183,000 of them, we spend about $200 million a year for electricity bills. We have more discussion later on in the webinar. Let's look at the Australian aged care needs over the coming 30 years. So if you look at this chart, where the blue bars are for the current demographics for Australia. So we kind of have more than 1.2 million people in the age group of 65 to 69, and over 1 million in the age group of 70 to 74, and so on. And then in 30 years' time, that'll be 2050. So the green bars, we will have over 1.8 million people living in that group. And I was talking to Adriana and Richard that I'm a bit maybe doing the research for my own purpose as well, because in 30 years' time, I will be nearly in that age group, so 1.8 million people. So next one, let's see about the resident number. So the number of residential aged care residents will be nearly doubled in 30 years' time. That can be seen from this figure. So the green line is for the residential aged care residents. The light blue or sky blue line is for Commonwealth Home Support Program. That's for the right-hand side axis. And the dark blue is of the home care package. So kind of 3 levels, different care or support packages. So for our focus of this webinar is more focused on the residential care, and you will see the reason why on the next slide. So at the moment, 2020, we have about 183,000 people, residents living. In 30 years' time, will be nearly doubled. So it's near to 350,000 residents. If you look at Commonwealth expenditure over the coming 30 years, so here is about 2020, we're looking into 2050. So the green bars are for the residential care Commonwealth's spending as a percentage of GDP, gross domestic product, as a kind of economic figure. At the moment, it's about 0.7%, and it may be increased to about 0.9% of GDP in 30 years' time. I'm not sure if this will be changed or not, depending on the findings or recommendations from latest Royal Commission investigation. So if you look at more precisely at the energy use at residential aged care communities, operational needs may include health services for some essential equipment, medical equipment, for example. Community services, so cooking, air conditioning at hall or dining places, administration for offices, for nursing rooms as well. Residents' needs, for example, space cooling, heating, lighting, appliances, and also reliability is quite important. By law, we need to have backup generators at residential aged care sites, and also UPS, for example, battery banks and inverters. That's for example, communication supply backup. If you look at our Australian energy use for residential aged care, New South Wales did an energy audit of 15 residential aged care communities, and that's listed. The results are listed on this pie chart. We can see that 44% of electricity was used for heating and cooling, and then followed by lighting, and then others. That's the remaining. Heating and cooling is #1 energy user. It's quite obvious. If we move on to see this bar chart by month in 2018, this is for a residential aged care community in Southeast Queensland, and the vertical axis is kilowatt hour per day. We have quite a lot of legends here, but if you just look at the blue one on the bottom, so that's for the air conditioning, also space cooling, mostly for our Queensland climate or Southeast Queensland climate. We can see that across the year, in every month, that air conditioning is the largest energy user of all. So air conditioning uses the, excuse me, largest amount of electricity, which was similar to the New South Wales, but I think our percentage is a bit higher compared to New South Wales finding. Let's move on to Tasmania. Tasmania did the energy audit of 9 residential HTKL communities. Here's including electricity and gas, it's benchmark. So there are 9 sites. So the vertical axis is kilowatt hour per bed per day. We can see that based on this energy use intensity, so kilowatt hour per bed per day, it ranges from 28.8 to 50.7 for the 9 sites. And the median value is somewhere around 32.9 kilowatt hour per bed per day, as for our Tasmanian 9 residential HTKL facilities. How would that be compared with our international studies, findings, or projects? Here's for some findings, summary statistics from 100 care homes in Europe. We call it, in Australia, we call aged care or nursing homes. In Europe, that more common name is care homes. Quite a lot of numbers here, but if we focus on the yellow highlighted number, or this energy use intensity number 2, KPI, key performance indicator, is a kilowatt hour per resident per year. If we convert that, the mean value, into per day, we can see it's about 32 kilowatt hour per resident per day, which is quite similar to the Tasmanian finding, the mean value for the 9 residential HCL facilities. And also some other ranges, that's quite big. Because this actually 100 care homes study actually investigated from Nordic countries all the way to the South Europe, for the 100 care homes in Europe. Next, let's move on to how do residential HCL communities' seasonal demand profiles look like. So here I plotted a 30-minute electricity demand profile, the box plots by seasons. So here's the winter month, spring month, summer month, and autumn month. So if we look at the summer month box plot, so we have a maximum value, minimum value for that time stamp, that's kind of midday, noon, and then 75 percentile, median value, and 25 percentile. And the red crosses are the outliers. Please note that the 4 seasons are not equally important. The reason is because in warm and hot climate zones that we tend to have more summer months. For example, for Queensland, or most of Queensland, like Southeast Queensland or Northern Queensland, we tend to have maybe it's from October to next year March kind of summer season. Of course, varies slightly across the years, but here summer is more important for North Australia. But how would that the yearly demand profile look like? So here is a similar 30-minute demand kilowatts on the vertical, and also half-hourly, that's the timestamps for the horizontal axis. We can see that this is the 2019 for a Southeast Queensland demand profile, looking like that. So a question comes up, is this profile similar to a residential demand profile, a home, a household, or more similar to a commercial demand profile? This has impact for energy planning or investment later on. So normally for a home or for a house, we tend to have a morning peak. That's because of cooking or waking up or hot water use, for example, and then quite flat during the day because go to school or go to work. And then in the late afternoon, the evening, we tend to have another peak. That's for cooking, for appliances, for entertainment, for example. And then we may have another peak kind of from 11 p.m. For example, for Queensland, that's because hot water heating. So this profile, I don't see it aligning with a residential or home demand profile, but it's possibly more similar to a commercial demand profile. Like when the day starts, tend to have ramping up of demands for energy, for electricity, and as the day goes down, to the late afternoon to evening, so obviously it's going down for the demand profile as well. Another question, is this profile similar in terms of shape to something else? So I was wondering this, looking at that. I like to visually analyze and present data in a more intuitive way. So for me, I feel like this is more like a temperature profile, for example, and also it can be quite similar to a solar radiation profile. And that has some impact later on, I will mention in this webinar. So then from this slide on, we start investigating what are the factors influencing energy use and demand. So here is also similarly box plots for peak demand, for energy use per day. But we talk about the 0, that's for the non-work day, and the 1 is for the work day. Do we see a big difference, or there's no significant difference between non-work day and work day in terms of energy or peak demand? Right, there's no significant difference. The next one is, are weekdays or weekends different for our residential HTKL communities in terms of peak demand or energy use? So 1 is like the Sundays, Monday, Tuesday, and so on until Saturday. So the same pattern follows. So is there a big difference in terms of weekdays and weekends, energy use or peak demand? Because normally that for commercial properties, we tend to have a drop of energy use or peak demand for the weekends. That's because that's, except possible shopping centers, that's quite different. But for offices, educational institutes, for example, or industry, for example, we tend to have a bit lower demand or energy use over the weekend. But that's not seen for HTKL. But of course, that's we may understand that HTKL, we don't really have a kind of maybe weekends, or because every day possibly quite similar. But what does that mean? Or what's the impact of having that evidence, the visual studies? So day types don't matter much for residential HTKL energy use and peak demand. And when residential HTKL communities consider low risk on-site generation mature technology such as rooftop PVs, what would happen? So we may expect a higher return on investment compared to office or commercial industry customers, because 7 days we have similar pattern or energy use. If we put, for example, renewable or PV on top roof for an office, often office have almost no uses over the weekends, so that return on investment may not be as high as putting renewables on our residential HTKL. And because that's based on current tariff or feed-in tariff or investment scheme, and that maybe the best way or highest return is from use on site rather than exporting. And residential HTKL that we have residents 24/7 every day with services provided as well. I personally see it as a cost control measure, because if we spend less on energy, it would hopefully have more on the healthcare side. Later, I have some ballpark estimates for the impact of doing this. So now let's look at the factor, another factor, temperature. Is temperature associated with energy use? So here is a scatter plot. So it's maximum daily temperature against the daily energy use in kilowatt hour. So what do we see here? It's kind of a tick pattern. What does that mean? So somewhere 24, 25, 26 is kind of median or comfortable region. When we have temperature go higher than that, we tend to have more needs for cooling. So that's the energy use goes higher. And if our temperature is a bit lower than that, possibly we need more energy for heating. So that's why. And this analysis will be related to later energy comparisons for 6 communities. And we studied 6 communities from Cairns to Southeast Queensland to Sydney, and a bit later on. How about peak demand? So monthly peak demand, if you look at this, I also drew a kind of a linear regression. You can see as temperature goes higher, we have monthly peak demand going higher as well. A background question is why are peak demands important? Mostly many reasons. For example, there are 2 here are listed. And network infrastructure, peak demand is a key factor when we do design or construction for our network infrastructure, like transformer, for example, or cables and conductors. And also peak demand can be part of a billing or tariff structure for commercial and also now rolling to residential customers as well. We understand that energy is the essential supply to make sure that healthcare has reliable and quality healthcare at our healthcare facilities or hospitals and aged care. But what if there's a health event like an epidemic? What would that do to our energy use of big demand? So we have studied 6 communities and residential aged care communities energy use and demand in the lockdown. It's published by Energy and Buildings journal. So that's from Cairns to Townsville to Brisbane to Toowoomba, Logan and Sydney. And key lockdown measures included restriction on visits, entry and exit, and also elimination of site group activities. So here is a kind of we grouped the 6 sites by climate zones, and Sydney and Toowoomba have similar temperate climate zone classification. If you look at Sydney, for example, I did a box plot, this is a scatter plot between daily maximum temperature and daily energy use in kilowatt hour. You can see that, and also different color, 2018 is the blue circles, 2019 was the orange circle, and also 2020 was the yellow circles. And we can see that in terms of, here's the distribution or a different way of doing the histogram for the temperature that for the 3 years, 2018, 19, 20, quite similar for the Sydney site. In terms of the daily energy use, also here's the histogram of the distribution. We see that 2020, we tend to have actually similar median daily peak demand and daily energy use, but the standard deviation is a bit less or more narrow in terms of the look of it. Also, we did a similar study for Toowoomba, but the overall results is that in terms of daily peak demand and daily energy use, there's some minor difference between like 1 or 4% difference if we compare the lockdown period to previous years. And let's look at the Cairns and Townsville. So the same method was applied. If we summarize the results of the findings, that so there are some differences compared to previous years in terms of daily peak demand and daily energy use. So for example, for the Cairns, it's 0%, almost no change to 4% change. And Townsville is about 4% to 11% of change. But if we look at our Southeast Queensland climate, a bit warmer than Sydney, but slightly cooler than the Cairns communities, but we have bigger difference compared to previous years. So in terms of daily peak demand and the daily energy use, we kind of have a 20-ish%, like 24%, 23% for the Brisbane community, and for the Logan community, we tend to have 11 to 19% of change. So climate seems to be a factor in terms of energy use in lockdown. How about the renewables? What would the rooftop PVs do if we had them during lockdowns? So here's a table to show renewables impact in the first lockdown period last year. So if you look at the columns first, so here's the PV systems for no PV for the first 2 rows as a baseline studies, and the later 2 and 3 rows here they are if we have 1 kilowatt peak per bed, also similar 1 kilowatt peak per bed for the electricity generation or for the emission and the reduction percentage. So Brisbane community, Logan, Sydney, Toowoomba, Cairns, and Townsville. What we see is that, so I highlighted some numbers, that the maximum numbers of that row. So Cairns and Townsville, they have actually reasonably slightly bigger size compared to here, the other communities. And also that the mean daily electricity use is a bit higher, also emission a bit higher. If we put the similar level, like 1 kilowatt peak PV per bed level for 6 communities. We can see Cairns and Townsville can generate a lot more electricity than other sites because they tend to have more solar radiation. And also because of that, they tend to have more CO2 reduction. So that's here. But in terms of percentage reduction, when we have the same kilowatt hour peak per bed PV on the roof, Sydney and the Toowoomba sites actually perform the best. Why is that? Because they are more like in the temperate climate zone, they use less energy. And it will be more visibly to see that in the next chart diagram. So let's look at the observation, so a bit more summary. That so 6 communities from Brisbane to Logan, Sydney, Toowoomba, Cairns, and Townsville. And I did put the 3 years KPI here. And I used the kilowatt hour per bed per day for the years. And the Brisbane, Logan, similar climate. Sydney, Toowoomba, similar climate. Cairns to Townsville, similar climate. And this orange line is for the number of bed at each community. So what's the observation? Larger communities tend to have lower energy use intensity. So that's like an energy use per bed level. Like the Brisbane community has more beds compared to the Logan. So they tend to have lower energy use per bed compared to the Logan community. And the climate plays a significant role in energy use. Because hot regions and energy use intensity tend to be higher than the warm regions, and the warm regions energy use intensity tend to be higher than the temperate regions. As for example, this hot region, warm region, and temperate region. If we do a bit of ballpark estimate for our 183,000 residential HKL residents, and let's consider 20 kilowatt hour per bed per day. That's not far away from the real figures, side figures. And if we take 15 cents as the energy price for the electricity, and this is lower than our home average electricity price already. So our yearly electricity bill for the 183,000 residents for our residential HKL sector will be somewhere around $201 million per year. If we use a balanced energy investment strategy, like considering rooftop PV's climate costs, investment or NPV, net present value, for example, and ongoing maintenance, the yearly savings can be somewhere around $40 million to $60 million. I don't want to bore you with the mathematics, so that has been published somewhere in that Renewable Energy Journal that we recently published. So I see that if we have a $40 million to $60 million savings every year, that can be put back to the KL side rather than spent on the electricity. We are working on some other aspects of residential HKL as well, like heating electrification to encourage we move from the fossil fuel heating at sites to more electrification, use electricity as a source of energy. So what we have learned so far, residential HKL demand profile can be more similar to commercial, but with more potential to enable local renewables. And temperature and climate are key factors for energy use and peak demand at residential HKL facilities. And the rooftop PV continues to perform regardless of lockdowns. Our vision will come true, or is coming true, with teamwork. Here's a list of some of our partners that we have partnered with Australian Renewable Energy Agency and Queensland Government, Children's Hospital, ERA, A2EP, and also we have industry support as well, Bolton Clark, Warrego Health, Synergical GMG, and other Australian local companies here. This is for heat pump and for example, based on Melbourne company for digital twins. And also we are collaborating with research institutes across Australia, working for a range of different projects like iHub projects, like RACE 2030 Corporate Research Centre projects, to encourage heating electrification for commercial industry and healthcare, and also building 4.0 and CRC. Also at the same time, sorry, because of limited space, I cannot put that many logos here. We have partnered with architecture companies and consulting firms and construction companies to break disciplinary boundaries to design engineering and high performance and health and also other outcomes and considered buildings for our aged care facilities. That's for integrated design studio. Thank you. That's all my presentation. I welcome all questions, comments, and feedbacks. Thank you.
Excellent, Aaron. Thank you very much for that brilliant presentation and for guiding us through with very good explanation of everything you've done and how you analyze your results as well. And I'd like to welcome any questions from the audience. And by all means, start up your camera if you'd like to. I think we may be able to ask the questions in person because no one has put any questions in the chat. If you don't want to ask it in question in person, put it in the chat, please, and I'll read it out to Aaron. Thank you.
Do I need to stop sharing, Adriana?
No, we keep recording.
Yep.
Yeah, we keep recording. All right. If no one, I will give people a little bit of time to think about their question. Aaron, are there any recommendations that you will be giving to the owners of these care facilities?
Yes.
As based on your findings?
Yes, that's a really good question. We're doing ongoing research with aged care providers across Australia and also research institutes and with different support from industry association and governments and the government-owned organizations. Let's say you mentioned recommendations, right? I feel that's a very good question. Actually, I'm working on that at the moment. Jeff will be one of my collaborators as well. What triggered me about that thought, I will mention very shortly, but that originated from this chart. What do we see from here is that looks like we have 3 levels. Like here is 1 level, another level of energy use per person or per bed, and another level. So I was thinking, what are the KPIs, key performance indicators that we can recommend or somewhere rough figures? Of course, there's no one size fit all for investing in our residential aged care facility energy assets, for example, I believe. But there we may be able to generate some recommendations or selection of KPIs, so we can make recommendations or do planning quite more efficiently and accurately. So that's that idea comes from this chart. Is that at Sydney or Toowoomba, maybe we need kind of if say very roughly 1 or slightly more than 1 kilowatt peak per bed for the rooftop PV, but for Brisbane, Logan, a bit more, and Cairns, Townsville, the hot climate zone, we can recommend more in terms of the kilowatt peak per bed investment, and that can be seen from the table before as well. So this one, if we look at Sydney and Toowoomba climate region, that this 1 kilowatt peak per bed may not be far away from a balanced investment decision for Sydney and Toowoomba climate residential aged care facility. From my calculation before, and also that running algorithms, that possibly if we can say, let's say we get a return in 3 years, so that's a kind of 30-ish% return. So here with Sydney Toowoomba, we can recommendate slightly more kilowatt peak per bed. But Cairns and Townsville looks like we need a lot more kilowatt peak per bed. If you look at the figure here, we can alleviate it more. And Brisbane and Logan, we need to put also slightly more as well. This is not enough for Brisbane and Logan climate. Of course, there are other also limitations or conditions we need to follow, like the site space, and also we tend to maybe maximize on-site use rather than export, and also we need the approval as well, right, from utilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
Yes.
I apologise if you've already covered this, but have you got any thoughts about the implications of multi-level facilities as opposed to single-storey in terms of energy implications?
Thank you, David. That's a great question, and you're right. And I think possibly because you know the sector. I'm working on the Innovation Hub, affordable heating and cooling project sponsored by ARENA and ERA. And you're right. That most of, for example, existing care facilities are kind of flat or 1 or 2 floors, but for one of our new Living Lab, we have one brand new building, kind of 6th floor with 164 beds. And that's a multi-bed aged care facility. I cannot provide the results to you at the moment because that building is just finished. And we have quite detailed data and sensors and measurements. And we can, so that was October last year. So in about another half a year, or slightly more time, we'll be able to present some. If you are interested, we can keep talking and share some knowledge, or we can learn something from you. Yeah, exchange ideas as well.
Yeah, there was some interesting research done probably 15 years ago now, looking at different housing typologies, and it found that the walk-up apartments, for Melbourne this is, were the most energy efficient. And that's partly because they don't have lifts. But as soon as you've got more than one level in an aged care facility, you've got lifts.
Yes.
So I imagine that you would want to have a quantum jump from single story to quite a few stories to get efficiencies.
Yep.
Rather than those sort of in-between levels.
Yep.
But that's just an instinct.
Yes, yes. Have a good question. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Any other questions from audience? Well, I will ask another question, Aaron, then. Was there anything that really surprised you, in your studies, something that you didn't expect to find out?
You're right. I like the question, Adriana, because often I feel like I do practical research, so I often have a hypothesis. So I think that's the way it should be, and I test it. I use evidence, use data analysis, use figures or visuals to present that. So before I do this analysis, for the change of the communities in lockdown and compared to previous years, I thought because of the restriction to on-site visits and also elimination of the site activities, I thought the energy use of peak demand should be reduced quite a lot across everywhere. That's because no except emergency medical staff, of course, but normal people, even family friends, were not supposed to visit, so less energy expected to use on site. Also, not almost no group activities at site. So I thought there should be a much bigger job across the board, for all the residential aged care facilities. However, it turns out not true. That's not the case. It depends on places or climate. For us, the 6 communities are managed by the same community. The same not-for-profit aged care group. So that the philosophy of management principle is similar. And it looks like Sydney, Toowoomba, the temperate regions actually tend to have almost this kind of -1.4. It's quite a minor, really minor change. But for our Brisbane weather, the climate or areas, that we tend to have a lot more change. So yeah, that's what surprised me.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. Our fellow researcher, Glenn Crompton, may be able to share some knowledge in the future. That he has some data or has some information on why that's the case.
Okay, so
That will
he's
be,
continuing. He's continuing in the
Yes.
research. Oh,
Yes, in the future.
good, good. Well, we may have him share his
Yes,
findings with us.
it's Glenn here, Adriana.
Yes.
Yes, Aaron's right. We are still working on that stuff, and just what he was saying then about the unexpected results from the lockdown. We thought it would show some differences, and from the bit I've focused on to start with was the bits of the energy which are not weather dependent, so lighting and so on. So we thought that lighting in certain areas, as we have some sub-metering in place, we thought we might find that common areas are used less and residential, the individual rooms might be used more. And it didn't really seem to be the case during lockdown, that everyone just seemed to, within the building, use the building the same way it was pre-lockdown. So yeah, we're still trying to work out how to present some of that data though.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Well, if people are interested in further work, then by all means, please contact Aaron, and he can direct them to the right source.
Thank you. Thank you, Adriana.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Glenn.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, it doesn't look like there are any other questions.
I've got a comment though I'd like to throw in there. The slides you had at the beginning, Aaron, showing that the cost of home care versus residential aged care, there seem to be significantly less. Hang on, I haven't got the.
This is a Commonwealth budget forecast.
Yeah, the budget ones were saying that the home care is a lot less expensive by the look of things than than residential aged care. So I wonder if there'll be from a financial point of view, it makes sense to try and keep people in home care longer than getting them into residential aged care, which
I'm not sure if I should mention that or not. What you just said is true.
Yes,
it's already true. That people tend to leave the home as long as possible.
Yes,
and also that's often is sad to mention that actually.
Yeah, that's what I thought was the thing. I mean, I'm an engineer, not an aged care expert, so I wasn't really don't really feel qualified to comment on the forecasts of where the percentage of elderly residents will live. But yeah, it does sort of make sense that oh, it's not showing up on. Yeah. So
yep.
I guess also that some of those numbers might be a bit skewed because in home care, the resident still pays for their energy bills and along with other bills, whereas in residential aged care, it's all covered by the facility. So, yeah.
Yep, that's a good point. Yeah.
That actually prompts another question, because with people tending to stay at home as long as they can now, they are generally needing a higher level of care by the time they do move into institutional care. And I'm imagining that would bring with it higher energy demands. Do you know anything about that?
To answer that question, I suppose we need to compare the aged care community's energy use intensity with home energy use intensity. So, for example, at Southeast Queensland, if my memory is right, we are using like kind of a 18 kilowatt hour per day at Southeast Queensland. If we look
that's for a household level, Aaron?
Yes,
yep.
yes. And at our aged care, I think it's not far away from that.
Yeah, aged care is slightly more than that.
Yeah,
depends
on what the climate. Depends on climate. Yep. Slightly more than that. Yeah, the community service part of often is the largest energy use. For example, the community center or auditorium or the meeting hall. Even if there's no people, that's kind of 24/7 air conditioned.
And corridors with lights left on and,
Yep.
and so on, all 24/7 because
Yeah,
they
all
have to be.
24/7. So that's a maybe that's a place we can improve as well.
I'm sure it is.
Can be part of your recommendations.
Yes, yes. Put sensors.
Yeah. All right. Well, if there are no more questions from the audience, we may close this seminar session. And by all means, feel free to contact Aaron if you would like to find out more about his continued research and that of his team. And we hope to see you again in one of our seminars in the future.
Thank
Thank you very much,
everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks,
you.
Aaron.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.